I never thought a propane tank would become the center of my life. But here I was, staring at a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Springs Homeowners Association that threatened daily fines if I didn't get my external gas tank inspected within 72 hours. My name is Yates Vance, and I'd bought my house in this upscale Phoenix, Arizona suburb about 8 months ago. The place was perfect. 4 bedrooms, a pool, mountain views, and most importantly, it was far enough from my ex-wife's place that I didn't have to worry about awkward encounters at the grocery store. The HOA seemed reasonable at first, just the usual rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. I should have known better. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, a woman I'd met exactly once at the mandatory new homeowner orientation. She'd worn a white pantsuit that day and had corrected my pronunciation of Meadowbrook 3 times in the span of 5 minutes. The letter stated that my propane tank, which sat on a concrete pad behind my house and powered my pool heater and outdoor kitchen, was potentially hazardous and needed immediate professional inspection documentation submitted to the HOA board. I read through the letter twice, trying to find the logic. The tank had been installed by the previous owner 5 years ago, was regularly filled by a licensed propane company, and had never given me a single problem. I'd even had it checked when I bought the house as part of my home inspection. But apparently, that wasn't good enough for Patricia. The kicker was the fine structure: $50 per day if I didn't comply, escalating to $100 per day after 2 weeks, and potential legal action if I remained non-compliant for 30 days. I calculated quickly in my head. That was potentially thousands of dollars over a gas tank that worked perfectly fine. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Meadowbrook Springs HOA, Patricia speaking. Hi, Patricia. This is Yates Vance from 4127 Desert Bloom Drive. I just received your letter about my propane tank. Oh yes, Mr. Vance. We need that inspection documentation as soon as possible. It's a safety concern. I understand safety is important, but the tank was inspected when I bought the house. Can I just send you that documentation? That inspection is 8 months old. Our new safety protocol requires current documentation, no older than 30 days. I paused, trying to keep my voice level. New safety protocol. When was this implemented? The board voted on it last month. All homeowners were notified via email. I pulled up my email on my phone, scrolling through. I don't see any email about this. Well, it was sent to all residents on file. Perhaps you should check your spam folder. I did. Nothing there either. Patricia, I'm not seeing any notification. This seems like it's coming out of nowhere. Her voice took on an edge. Mr. Vance, whether you received the email or not, ignorance of HOA regulations is not an excuse for non-compliance. You have 72 hours from receipt of this letter, which means you have until Friday at 5 p.m. And if I don't, then the fines begin accumulating, $50 per day. I took a deep breath. Fine, I'll get it inspected. Wonderful. We look forward to receiving your documentation. Have a blessed day. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Arizona Propane Services, the company that filled my tank. A friendly guy named Marco answered. Yeah, we can do an inspection, he said, but our next available appointment isn't until next Tuesday. That's after my deadline. This is urgent. Sorry, man, we're completely booked. Spring is our busy season. Everyone wants their tanks checked before summer. I called 3 more companies. Same story at each one. Finally, I found a small outfit called Desert Gas Solutions that could squeeze me in Thursday afternoon. The inspection would cost $250. Thursday came, and a technician named Robert showed up in a beat-up white van. He was maybe 60, with weathered skin and a no-nonsense attitude. The inspection took about 45 minutes. He checked for leaks, tested the pressure relief valve, examined the connections, and inspected the concrete pad for stability. "Everything looks great," Robert said, filling out paperwork on a clipboard. "This tank is in excellent condition. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing." "That's what I figured. My HOA is requiring this inspection." Robert shook his head. "Yeah, I've been seeing more of that lately. HOA's getting into stuff they don't understand. This tank doesn't legally need an inspection unless you're having problems or it's been physically damaged." "Really?" "Yeah. I mean, it's good practice to have them checked periodically, but there's no law requiring annual inspections or anything like that for residential propane tanks in Arizona. Commercial tanks, different story, but residential, nah." He handed me the completed inspection report, stamped and signed. I paid him, thanked him profusely, and immediately scanned the document to send to Patricia. I emailed it Friday morning, a full day before the deadline. Patricia responded within an hour. "Mr. Vance, thank you for submitting your inspection report. Please be advised that per HOA regulations, this inspection documentation is valid for 30 days. You will need to have your tank re-inspected and submit updated documentation by June 8th to remain in compliance." I stared at my computer screen. 30 days. She expected me to pay $250 every 30 days to inspect a tank that didn't need inspecting. I picked up the phone and called her directly. "Patricia, I just got your email. You're saying I need to have this inspected every month?" "That's correct. It's part of our safety protocols. That's going to cost me $3,000 a year. Safety isn't free, Mr. Vance. But the technician told me there's no legal requirement for these inspections. The tank is completely safe. HOA regulations supersede personal opinions, even those of technicians. If you have concerns about our policies, you're welcome to attend our next board meeting and voice them during the public comment period." "When is that?" "The third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. I marked it on my calendar. I'll be there." "Wonderful. Have a blessed day." Over the next 2 weeks, I did my research. I read through every page of the HOA's CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that governed our neighborhood. Nowhere did it mention propane tanks, gas tank inspections, or any 30-day inspection requirement. I also looked into Arizona HOA law and found that, while HOAs had broad authority, they couldn't create rules that were arbitrary or applied unequally. I also discovered something interesting. The HOA's Architectural Review Committee had to approve any external fixtures or modifications, but propane tanks were specifically exempt in the original CC and Articles because they were considered utility equipment, like electrical meters or HVAC units. The night of the board meeting, I showed up at the community center 15 minutes early. The meeting room was small, with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members would sit. About a dozen other homeowners were scattered around the room, most looking either bored or irritated. Patricia arrived right at 7, along with 4 other board members. She took the center seat. The others introduced themselves. Gerald, the treasurer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, Brenda, the secretary who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, and 2 at-large members, Tom and Linda, who both seemed friendly enough. The meeting started with standard business: approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of upcoming landscaping contracts for common areas. I waded through 45 minutes of mind-numbing administrative details. Finally, Patricia said, "We'll now open the floor for public comments. Each resident has 3 minutes." I raised my hand. Patricia's eyes locked onto me, and I saw something that might have been anticipation. "Yes, Mr. Vance." I stood up. "Hi, everyone. I'm here to discuss the new propane tank inspection policy. I recently received notice that I needed to have my tank inspected every 30 days and submit documentation to the HOA. This inspection costs $250 each time." A few murmurs went through the other residents. "I've reviewed our CC and Artiques," I continued, "and I can't find any mention of this requirement. I'm wondering where this policy came from and what the justification is." Patricia smiled tightly. "Mr. Vance, the board has authority under Section 12.3 of the CC and Artiques to implement safety measures as deemed necessary for the protection of residents and property values. I understand that, but propane tanks are specifically exempt from architectural review under Section 8.7. And the technician who inspected my tank confirmed there's no legal requirement for monthly inspections. This seems excessive." "The board determines what is excessive, not individual homeowners." Gerald leaned forward. "Patricia, can I ask when we voted on this policy? I don't recall this coming up." Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It was discussed at our executive session in March." "I don't remember that," Brenda said, flipping through a notebook. "And I don't have any notes about it." "It may have been an emergency action I took as president," Patricia said. "Under Section 14.2, the president can implement emergency safety measures." I pulled out my phone, where I'd saved the relevant section. Section 14.2 states that emergency actions are valid for a maximum of 14 days, after which they must be ratified by the full board at the next meeting. "Has this been ratified?" The room went quiet. Tom and Linda exchanged glances. Gerald was staring at Patricia. "I'll have to review the records," Patricia said, her voice clipped. "Regardless, the policy is in effect." "But is it legal if it wasn't properly ratified?" I pressed. "Mr. Vance, your 3 minutes are up." "Thank you for your comments." I sat down, frustrated but feeling like I'd at least planted some seeds of doubt. After the meeting, Gerald approached me in the parking lot. "Hey, Yates, right?" "Yeah. That was interesting in there." "Between you and me, Patricia sometimes makes decisions without consulting the rest of us. I'm going to look into this propane tank thing." "I appreciate that. It just seems like she's singling me out for some reason." Gerald nodded thoughtfully. "You might not be wrong about that. Hang tight." The next day, my 30 days were up. Friday afternoon, I received another certified letter from Patricia demanding updated inspection documentation and notifying me that I was now accruing $50 per day in fines. I called Robert at Desert Gas Solutions. "Hey, Robert, it's Yates Vance. You did that propane tank inspection for me last month." "Oh yeah, I remember. HOA giving you trouble. They want me to have it inspected every 30 days. Robert laughed, then realized I was serious. "Wait, you're not joking." "Nope. They're fining me $50 a day until I get it re-inspected." "That's insane. That tank doesn't need monthly inspections. Hell, it barely needs annual inspections." An idea formed in my mind. "Robert, how much would you charge me if I wanted weekly inspections?" "Weekly." "Why would you want that?" "Because if they're going to make up arbitrary rules, I'm going to comply so aggressively that I make their lives difficult." "How much?" He was quiet for a moment. "Normal inspection is $250. But if you want weekly, I could do $100 per visit." "It would literally just be me showing up, doing a visual check and signing off. Takes maybe 15 minutes. "That works. Can you come by today?" Sure, I can be there in an hour. Robert showed up and did a quick inspection identical to the first one. Everything was fine as expected. He gave me the paperwork. I paid him, and I scanned it to send to Patricia. In my email, I wrote, "Patricia, please find attached the current propane tank inspection documentation as requested." To ensure full compliance with HOA safety protocols and to eliminate any concerns about the 30-day validity period, I have arranged for weekly inspections moving forward. You can expect updated documentation every Friday. I hit send and smiled. Patricia called me 20 minutes later. "Mr. Vance, weekly inspections are not necessary." I disagree. If safety is such a concern that monthly inspections are required, weekly inspections are even safer. I take HOA regulations very seriously. This is excessive. You said safety isn't free. I'm simply being as safe as possible. You don't need to send us documentation every week. Actually, I do. The policy states I need to submit current documentation. I want to ensure I'm always in compliance. I'd hate for there to be any confusion. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Mr. Vance, this is unnecessary harassment of the HOA board." "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm complying with your policy. Have a blessed day, Patricia." I hung up before she could respond. The next Friday, I sent another inspection report, and the Friday after that, and the one after that. Each time, Patricia's responses became increasingly terse. After the fourth week, she stopped responding altogether, though I kept sending them. I made sure to CC all the board members on every email. Meanwhile, I'd been doing more digging. I requested copies of all board meeting minutes for the past year through the proper channels. Arizona law required HOAs to provide these documents to homeowners within 10 business days. Patricia dragged her feet, but Gerald, who seemed increasingly frustrated with her, sent them to me directly. Going through the minutes, I found no mention of any propane tank inspection policy. Not in March, not in any executive session, not anywhere. Patricia had made it up entirely. I also found something else interesting. In the minutes from October, there was a vote to approve a landscaping contract with a company called Hendricks Desert Landscaping. The vote had passed 3-2, with Patricia voting yes. A quick Google search revealed that Hendricks Desert Landscaping was owned by Richard Hendricks. More searching revealed that Richard Hendricks was Patricia's husband. That was a clear conflict of interest. I dug deeper and found that Hendricks Desert Landscaping had been awarded 3 separate contracts by the HOA over the past 18 months, totaling nearly $80,000. Patricia had voted yes on all of them and had never disclosed the relationship. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was pretty sure this violated Arizona's HOA conflict of interest statutes. I compiled all the evidence. The emails about the propane tank policy, the board meeting minutes showing no vote had ever occurred, the documentation of Patricia's unilateral decision-making, and the information about her husband's landscaping contracts. Then I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA law. Her name was Sarah Morrison, and she had a reputation for not putting up with HOA overreach. Sarah's office was in Scottsdale, in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. "So let me make sure I understand," she said after I'd explained everything. The HOA president created a policy requiring monthly propane tank inspections, claimed it was an emergency action, never had it ratified by the board, and is now fining you for non-compliance. That's correct. And when I started complying by doing weekly inspections, she told me I was harassing the board. Sarah laughed. "That's beautiful. And you have documentation of all this, every email, every inspection report, every letter. And this conflict of interest with her husband's company. I've got the board minutes, the contracts, and the voting records. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Mr. Vance, you have an excellent case. Patricia Hendricks has violated multiple provisions of Arizona HOA law. The self-dealing alone could get her removed from the board and potentially expose her to criminal liability if the amounts are significant enough. Criminal liability. HOA board members are fiduciaries. They have a legal duty to act in the best interests of the association. When they use their position for personal gain, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. In cases involving significant amounts of money, it can be prosecuted as fraud or embezzlement. $80,000 seems significant. It is. Here's what I recommend. We send a demand letter to the HOA board, not just Patricia, outlining all the violations. We demand that the propane tank policy be rescinded, all fines be dropped, and that the board investigate Patricia's conflicts of interest. We give them 14 days to respond. And if they don't, then we file a lawsuit against the HOA and Patricia personally. We'll also file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs, and depending on what we find, we might involve law enforcement. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. But here's the thing. Arizona law allows prevailing parties in HOA disputes to recover attorney fees. If we win, and I think we will, the HOA pays your legal bills. And given the conflict of interest issues, you might also be entitled to damages. I thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. Let's do it. Sarah drafted a comprehensive demand letter that laid out every violation in excruciating detail. She sent it via certified mail to each board member individually, as well as to the HOA's registered agent. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Gerald called me. Yates, it's Gerald from the HOA board. Listen, I got this letter from your attorney. This is serious stuff. I know. That's why I hired her. I had no idea about the conflict of interest with Patricia's husband. None of us did. She never disclosed it. That's illegal, Gerald. I know. I've been on the phone with Tom and Linda all morning. We're calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Patricia doesn't know about it yet. We're going to confront her with all of this. Can I be there? It's technically a closed session since it's a personnel matter, but I'll make sure you get the outcome. And Yates, I'm sorry about all this. The propane tank thing was completely out of line. The next evening, I waited by my phone. Around 9 p.m., Gerald called. It's done. Patricia has resigned from the board, effective immediately. Really, when we confronted her with the evidence, she couldn't deny it. She tried to claim the landscaping contracts were legitimate and that her husband's company had submitted the lowest bids, but we checked. He didn't. In fact, 2 of the 3 times there were lower bids that weren't selected. What about the propane tank policy? Rescinded. The board voted unanimously. There never was any legal basis for it, and all your fines are being waived. We're also going to send a letter to every homeowner apologizing for the confusion and clarifying that there is no monthly inspection requirement for propane tanks. Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate you doing the right thing. There's more. We're hiring a forensic accountant to go through all the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. If Patricia has been doing this kind of thing with other contracts, we need to know. And we'll be turning over our findings to the Arizona Attorney General's office. I thanked Gerald again and immediately called Sarah to update her. That's a good start, she said. But don't drop your guard yet. We need to make sure they follow through on everything they promised. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The HOA sent formal letters confirming the rescission of the propane tank policy and the waiver of my fines. Gerald was appointed interim president, and they scheduled a special election for a permanent replacement. The forensic accountant's report came back 6 weeks later. It was devastating for Patricia. Over 3 years, she had steered nearly $240,000 in HOA contracts to her husband's company, consistently ignoring lower bids and never disclosing the conflict of interest. There were also irregularities with how she'd handled some of the HOA's reserve funds, with several $1,000s that couldn't be properly accounted for. Gerald called me when they received the report. "Yates, this is bad. Really bad. The accountant is recommending we refer this to law enforcement." "Are you going to?" The board voted. "We have to. This isn't just bad judgment, it's fraud." 2 days later, I saw Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs. I was coming back from the gym and stopped my car at the end of my street, watching from a distance. 2 Phoenix Police Department detectives were walking her to an unmarked sedan. Her husband Richard was standing in their doorway, looking pale and shocked. The local news picked up the story that evening. "Former HOA president arrested on fraud charges" was the headline. The reporter stood in front of the Meadowbrook Springs entrance sign and explained how Patricia Hendricks had allegedly embezzled funds and engaged in self-dealing schemes over a 3-year period. My phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors. People I'd barely spoken to were suddenly reaching out, asking if I'd heard the news, if I knew this was happening, how crazy it was. A few people knew I'd been involved. One neighbor, a guy named Chris who lived 2 streets over, called me directly. "Dude, I heard you're the one who caught her." "Is that true?" I didn't set out to catch her. I just refused to go along with a ridiculous policy about my gas tank. "That's wild. You know what's funny? She threatened me last year about my basketball hoop, said it was too close to the street and I needed to move it back 10 feet. I spent $300 getting it reinstalled, and now I'm wondering if that was even a real rule. Probably wasn't. You should check the CC and Arctic S." I continued my weekly propane tank inspections for another month, even after the policy was rescinded. It had become a point of pride, and honestly, Robert and I had developed a good rapport. He'd show up Friday afternoons, we'd chat while he did his quick visual check, and then we'd usually have a beer on my back patio. "You know you don't have to keep doing this," Robert said one Friday in late July. "I know. But it's kind of therapeutic at this point. Plus, I figure the paperwork trail will be useful if Patricia tries to cause any more trouble. She's got bigger problems now than your gas tank." He was right. Patricia's arraignment had been on the news. She was facing 12 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her bail had been set at $50,000. Her husband had posted it, but their house was now up for sale, and rumor was they were leaving Arizona entirely. Sarah called me a few days later with an update. "The HOA's insurance carrier reached out. They want to settle." "Settle what? I never even filed a lawsuit." "No, but you were clearly harmed by Patricia's actions. The insurance company knows that if you do sue, you'll win easily. They're offering $25,000 to release any claims you might have against the HOA." $25,000? For what? Emotional distress, the cost of your inspections, your time, harassment. We could argue for more if you want to push it. I thought about it. "What do you recommend?" "Take it. It's a fair offer and it closes this chapter. You've already won the important battles. Patricia's gone, the policy is rescinded, and she's facing criminal charges. Getting paid on top of that is just icing." "Okay, let's take it." The settlement came through in August. After Sarah's fees and the cost of my inspections, I netted about $18,000. Not life-changing money, but satisfying given how the whole thing had started. Gerald stepped down as interim president after the special election. A woman named Jennifer Torres was elected as the new president. She was a retired school principal with a reputation for fairness and transparency. One of her first acts was to form a committee to review all HOA policies and remove anything that wasn't properly authorized or that conflicted with the CC and Articles. They found dozens of rules that had been implemented over the years without proper procedure, most of them during Patricia's tenure. All were rescinded. The committee also recommended amending the CC and Articles to require better oversight of board decisions and mandatory disclosure of any potential conflicts of interest. The homeowners voted overwhelmingly to approve the amendments in September. Patricia's trial was scheduled for November. I was listed as a potential witness, though Sarah said it was unlikely I'd be called since the financial evidence was so strong. The prosecution had built their case around the forensic accounting report and the pattern of contract steering. In mid-October, Gerald called me with news. Patricia took a plea deal. Really? Yeah, she's pleading guilty to 6 counts of fraud. The prosecutor agreed to drop the embezzlement charges. She's looking at 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and she has to pay full restitution to the HOA. How much restitution? $240,000 for the contracts, plus about $30,000 in accounting and legal fees we incurred investigating her. And she can never serve on an HOA board again in Arizona. Good. Her husband's business is done too. No one in the area will hire him now. I heard he's moving back to Michigan where he's from. Patricia was sentenced in early December. I didn't attend the hearing, but Sarah went and called me afterward. She got 2 years. Judge said her breach of trust warranted more than the minimum sentence. 2 years. I thought the deal was for 18 months. It was, but the judge can exceed the plea agreement recommendation if they want. This judge clearly wanted to send a message about HOA board members abusing their positions. Christmas came and went. Life in Meadowbrook Springs had settled into a comfortable normalcy. The new board was functional and transparent. Jennifer Torres ran meetings efficiently and actually listened to homeowner concerns. The mandatory monthly newsletters now included detailed financial reports and upcoming agenda items. I finally stopped having my propane tank inspected weekly in January, almost exactly a year after Patricia had sent me that first certified letter. Robert and I had become good friends by then, and he'd earned about $5,000 from me over those months. Not a bad side income for 15-minute weekly visits. On a Friday afternoon in mid-January, I was sitting on my back patio, looking at my propane tank and reflecting on the absurdity of how a simple piece of utility equipment had become the catalyst for exposing massive fraud. My phone rang. It was Chris, the neighbor with the basketball hoop. "Hey, Yates. A bunch of us are getting together tomorrow for a barbecue. You should come. Everyone wants to thank you properly for getting rid of Patricia." "You don't need to thank me. I was just dealing with my own problem." "Yeah, but you actually did something. Most of us just complained about her and then went along with whatever crazy rules she came up with. You stood up to her." I agreed to come to the barbecue. The next day, about 20 neighbors showed up. It was the first time many of us had really interacted beyond polite waves. People shared stories about their own encounters with Patricia, her arbitrary rules, her condescending attitude, her threats of fines. One elderly couple, the Martins, told me about how Patricia had threatened to fine them for having their trash cans visible from the street, even though they'd put them out the night before pickup, as required. Another neighbor, A single mom named Rachel explained how Patricia had tried to fine her for having a broken fence slat, demanding it be replaced within 24 hours even though it had been damaged by a monsoon storm, and every handyman in Phoenix was booked solid. The stories went on and on. It became clear that Patricia had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and I just happened to be the one who pushed back hard enough and had the resources to hire an attorney. To Yates, someone said, raising a beer, and his propane tank. Everyone laughed and raised their drinks. It was absurd, but it was also meaningful. A community that had been living under the thumb of a petty tyrant was finally free. As winter turned to spring, I got more involved in the HOA. Not as a board member, I had no interest in that, but as an engaged homeowner who attended meetings and participated in discussions. Jennifer Torres was doing a good job, but she made sure to get input from residents on major decisions. In March, they were discussing whether to repave the community walking trails. Jennifer presented 3 bids at the meeting, explained the differences, and asked for feedback. It was night and day compared to how Patricia had operated. Someone asked how they could be sure there were no conflicts of interest with the bidders. Jennifer smiled. Good question. Each board member signed a conflict of interest disclosure form at the beginning of the year, which are public record. Anyone can review them. Additionally, for any contract over $10,000, we require at least 3 competitive bids, and we document why we selected the one we did. That was the kind of transparency that had been missing before. I ran into Robert at a hardware store in April. He was buying supplies for his van. "Hey, stranger," he said. "I haven't seen you in a while. Tank doing okay?" "Tank's perfect, just like it always was. You know, I should send Patricia a thank you card. Those weekly inspections paid for a nice vacation for me and my wife." We both laughed. "Actually," Robert continued, "I got calls from 3 other homeowners in your neighborhood who wanted regular inspections after they heard about what happened. I had to explain to them that they really didn't need it. Did you tell them about the weekly inspection deal?" "Nah, that was special pricing just for you, for proving a point." In June, I got a letter from the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They were conducting a follow-up review of Meadowbrook Springs HOA's governance practices after Patricia's conviction. They wanted to interview me as part of their investigation. I met with an investigator named David Chen at a coffee shop in Phoenix. He was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about how the HOA had operated under Patricia's leadership, what red flags I'd noticed, and what had prompted me to push back. "Mr. Vance, your case has actually led to some policy discussions at the state level," David said. "We're considering new regulations that would require HOAs to have more robust financial oversight and conflict of interest protections." That seems like a good idea. The problem is that most HOA board members are volunteers who don't have experience with governance or fiduciary duties. They don't know what they don't know. Someone like Patricia Hendricks can manipulate the system pretty easily if there aren't checks and balances in place. What happened in our neighborhood was that she'd been president for so long that everyone just assumed she knew what she was doing. No one questioned her. David nodded. "That's a common pattern. We see it a lot right before fraud is discovered." The Department of Real Estate issued their report in August. They found significant governance failures at Meadowbrook Springs, but noted that the current board had implemented strong corrective measures. They also made several recommendations for HOAs statewide, including mandatory financial audits for associations over a certain size, term limits for board members, and required training in fiduciary duties. I felt some satisfaction knowing that Patricia's downfall might lead to positive changes that would protect other homeowners. Patricia herself was released from prison in September after serving 8 months of her 2-year sentence. She'd gotten early release for good behavior and would serve the remainder on house arrest. But she wasn't coming back to Meadowbrook Springs. The last I heard, she and Richard had moved to some small town in Michigan. One evening in October, almost 2 years after this whole thing started, I was sitting on my patio with a beer, looking at my propane tank, the tank that had started everything. It sat there, quietly doing its job, completely oblivious to the chaos it had inadvertently caused. My girlfriend Sophia, whom I'd started dating in the spring, came outside and sat next to me. "You're staring at your gas tank again," she said, "just thinking about how weird life is. Because you took down an HOA president through aggressive compliance with her own made-up rule." "When you put it that way, it sounds almost reasonable." Sophia laughed. She'd heard the whole story multiple times by now. "You know what I think? I think Patricia picked the wrong person to mess with. She'd probably been getting away with her little power trips for years because most people just paid the fines or went along with whatever she said. You were the first person to actually fight back. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want to waste money on unnecessary inspections. And yet here we are. She's in prison, you're $18,000 richer, and your propane tank is probably the most thoroughly inspected residential gas tank in Arizona." I raised my beer. "To the propane tank." Sophia clinked her bottle against mine. "To the propane tank." The next week, I got an unexpected call from a reporter at the Arizona Republic. She was doing a story on HOA fraud and wanted to interview me about my experience with Patricia Hendricks. We met at a restaurant in downtown Phoenix. The reporter, Melissa Grant, was young and energetic with a notebook full of questions. "Mr. Vance, your story has become kind of legendary in HOA reform circles," she said. "The guy who brought down a corrupt HOA president with weekly gas tank inspections." "I'm not sure legendary is the right word. But you did something that most people don't do. You pushed back." Why? I thought about it. Honestly, I was just stubborn. The whole thing seemed so arbitrary and unfair. I'd just gotten divorced, bought this house, I was trying to start fresh. And then this woman I'd barely met was threatening to fine me thousands of dollars over a gas tank that didn't need inspecting. It felt like bullying, and I don't respond well to bullies. When did you realize there was more going on than just the gas tank issue? When I started digging into the board meeting minutes and couldn't find any evidence that the policy had ever been voted on, that's when I knew something was off. The conflict of interest stuff with her husband's company, that came later. "You think HOA fraud is common?" I'm not an expert, but from what I've learned over the past 2 years, I think it's more common than people realize. Most of it probably never gets discovered because homeowners don't question the board or don't have the resources to fight back. The article ran the following Sunday. It was a long piece that used my story as a jumping-off point to discuss broader issues with HOA governance in Arizona. Melissa had interviewed several other people, including Sarah Morrison, David Chen from the Department of Real Estate, and a couple of academics who studied HOA law. The article sparked some discussion on local news websites and social media. People shared their own HOA horror stories in the comments. Some were legitimate complaints about overreach and arbitrary rules. Others were people upset that they couldn't paint their house purple or park an RV in their driveway. Which, that's what you sign up for when you buy in an HOA. I got a few calls from other homeowners around the Phoenix area who were dealing with their own HOA issues. I wasn't qualified to give legal advice, but I referred them all to Sarah Morrison. One call stood out. It was from a guy named Mark who lived in a subdivision in Surprise. His HOA was trying to fine him for having solar panels that were too visible from the street. "The thing is," Mark said, "Arizona has a solar rights law. HOAs can't prohibit solar panels. So why are they fining you?" "I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. How did you deal with it when your HOA was being unreasonable?" I told him the same thing I'd told everyone else. Document everything. Know the rules better than the board does and get a lawyer if necessary. But I also told him something else. The key is not backing down. People like Patricia Hendricks, they rely on intimidation. They count on you being scared of the fines or the conflict. Once you make it clear you're not going to be pushed around, they usually back off. And if they don't back off, then you fight. But you fight smart. You use their own rules against them. You find the inconsistencies and the overreach. And you make sure everything is documented. Mark thanked me and said he was going to contact Sarah. In November, the HOA held its annual meeting. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Springs was invited. The meeting was held in a large clubhouse, and the turnout was the highest anyone could remember. People were actually engaged now. Jennifer Torres gave a presentation on the year's accomplishments. Repaved walking trails, upgraded pool equipment, improved landscaping in common areas, and most importantly, restored trust in the board's governance. "This has been a difficult year for our community," Jennifer said. "We've had to reckon with serious failures in leadership and oversight, but I'm proud of how we've responded. We've implemented new safeguards, increased transparency, and worked to rebuild trust. I want to thank everyone for their patience and participation." She then did something unexpected. "I also want to specifically thank Yates Vance. Yates, can you stand up?" I reluctantly stood, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. Yates had the courage to question policies that didn't make sense and to hold leadership accountable, Jennifer continued. His actions led to the discovery of serious wrongdoing and ultimately made our community better. That took guts, and we're all benefiting from it. People applauded. It was embarrassing and gratifying at the same time. I sat down quickly. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me personally. The elderly Martins, the couple who'd been threatened over their trash cans, gave me a hug. Rachel, the single mom, told me she felt safe now that Patricia was gone. "I used to be terrified to put anything in my yard or make any changes to my house," Rachel said. "Now I actually feel like I can live here without constantly looking over my shoulder." As December rolled around and the year came to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a dispute over a propane tank had exposed corruption, led to a criminal conviction, resulted in policy changes at the state level, and fundamentally changed the culture of my neighborhood. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been living under Patricia's arbitrary rule. Did I ever expect any of this when I opened that first certified letter 2 years ago? Not in a million years. Sophia and I were at my house on New Year's Eve, watching fireworks from my back patio. The propane tank sat there in the corner, silent and unassuming. "You know what's funny?" Sophia said. "That tank is probably the most famous propane tank in Arizona. It better not be. I don't want it going to its head. Too late. I saw it posing for selfies earlier." I laughed. We watched the fireworks burst over the Phoenix skyline, celebrating the end of one year and the beginning of another. My phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. "Happy New Year, Yates. Thanks again for everything you did. This neighborhood is so much better because of you." I texted back, "Happy New Year. Thanks for standing up with me." Because that was the truth. I might have started the ball rolling, but Gerald and the other board members had done the right thing when it mattered. They'd held Patricia accountable instead of circling the wagons to protect her. As midnight approached and the final countdown began, I thought about what I'd learned over the past 2 years. That standing up to bullies is hard but necessary. That documentation and evidence matter more than anger or righteous indignation. That seemingly small acts of resistance can have ripple effects you never anticipate, and that sometimes the most ridiculous situations lead to the most meaningful changes. The fireworks reached their crescendo, filling the sky with brilliant colors. Sophia kissed me at midnight. My propane tank sat quietly in the corner, just doing its job. Life was good in Meadowbrook Springs. The HOA was functional and fair. The neighbors were friendly and engaged. Patricia Hendricks was gone, serving out her house arrest in Michigan, legally barred from ever serving on an HOA board again. And me. I was just a guy who'd refused to back down when someone tried to bully him over a gas tank. A guy who'd learned that aggressive compliance with unreasonable rules could be its own form of protest. A guy who'd accidentally become a minor folk hero in HOA reform circles. But mostly, I was just a guy with a really well-inspected propane tank. The next morning, New Year's Day, I was having coffee on my patio when my phone rang. It was Sarah Morrison. "Happy New Year, Yates." "Happy New Year, Sarah. What's up?" "I just got an interesting email. There's a national HOA reform organization that wants to feature your story in their newsletter. They're calling it a case study in homeowner advocacy." "That seems a bit much." "I disagree. Your case is a perfect example of how individual homeowners can challenge HOA overreach when they're armed with documentation and legal support. They want to interview you for their article." "Sure, why not? If it helps other people, I'm happy to talk about it." And so, my story spread beyond Arizona. The National HOA Reform Organization published their article in February, and it got picked up by several news outlets. I did a few phone interviews, always making sure to credit Gerald and the other board members who'd supported the investigation, and to emphasize the importance of Sarah's legal expertise. The message was simple. Homeowners have rights, HOA boards have limits, and when those limits are exceeded, there are remedies available. But you have to be willing to fight for them. By spring, things had fully settled into a new normal. The HOA was running smoothly under Jennifer's leadership. My propane tank was working perfectly, as it always had, with no inspections required unless something went wrong. I'd become somewhat active in local HOA reform efforts, occasionally speaking at community meetings about my experience. And every time I walked past that propane tank, I smiled a little. It was just a piece of equipment, a metal cylinder filled with pressurized gas, completely unaware that it had become a symbol of something larger. Patricia Hendricks had tried to bully me into compliance with an arbitrary, made-up rule. Instead, I turned her weapon against her, complying so aggressively and so thoroughly that it exposed her entire pattern of corruption. It was the most expensive, most documented, most thoroughly inspected propane tank in the history of residential Arizona. And it had brought down a tyrant. That, I thought, was something worth celebrating.